Alrighty, well, welcome to the Redacted Culture Cast. This is episode 67, and the objective of the show has always been to focus a little bit on what we think about when we talk about gun culture. This is it's kind of born out of a long-standing frustration with the use of the word philosophy. I think in many ways, as a prelude, the term philosophy is usually confused with spirituality or spiritualism or sort of some sense of mindfulness, when really, historically speaking, the term refers to a rigorous approach to what we think about and having a method of checks and balances to address how we think about the world. And so, without further ado, I prefer to have my guests introduce themselves. Would you go ahead?
Yeah, so my name's Ethan Walters, better known as Gypsy Walters. I'm a tattooer and illustrator in the firearms industry. That's about it, man. Just a regular guy. Nothing special.
The to say a tattooer, is it a tattooer or tattooist, right?
Tattooer, a tattoo artist
Tattoo
to
artist.
be more like a tattoo artist.
Okay.
It's tough being an artist in almost all mediums. It's kind of tattooer, illustrator, graphic design, painter,
Hmm.
what have you, doodler. It's just a blanket. So it really falls down to primarily I've been a professional tattooer for 13 years, and I've been a professional illustrator for about 4 now.
Hmm. And so, I kind of I just want to focus on that one point though. It's like you're a tattoo artist in the firearms industry. It's I think
Right.
I've seen that as a sign, kind of a statement that this idea of like gun culture or the firearms people or whoever they are isn't really as small or as narrowly focused when it comes to what we put our work into.
Right.
But yeah, well, thank you for coming on the show. I think many people know how to find you, but
A few.
if you do, you'll figure it out. And like,
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I've never done a podcast, so you'll be popping my cherry on this one.
scary. There are other things that have never been done, and we'll have to get through to that in the future.
Yeah.
That's like the worst way of saying it. Some things have not been done. Let's go do it. Okay, cool. Uh, well, that being the case, you and I have been working together for season 1, Operation 2, refer currently titled Into Beasts, and the artwork and the material that you put together, that has come together into our content or our shirts, and the merch will be going live later this week. And so I think by now most people have seen the announcement. But today we're going to one of the main things that I wanted to talk about is what is the message and the ideas that went into that subject. It's kind of one of the reasons why I'm glad to have you on, although I think we're going to push that off to a little bit later in the show. So, Ethan, how let's do like the normal questions that should happen. How did you how did you get into gun culture? How did that start?
Um, let's see. In a professional sense, or just introduced in general?
I think introduced in general is a little bit more important.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you could start going back to being a kid, and my grandpa would let me shoot cans off the back porch with a 22. And that's kind of when I first got introduced to firearms. And then, yeah, into my more formative years, I got into not so much trouble, but like, I don't know, firearms always somewhat infatuated. Let's see. It's tough. Let's see. Man, put me on the spot.
It happens, but
I know, it's terrible.
not.
Um, so let's see. I basically just always liked firearms. I really started getting into owning them around 2009, 2008. I got my first AR, and then it was a cheap Bushmaster Carbon 15, and threw an EOTech on it. I at least went right with the optic. Um, but I didn't really. I kind of just had them, and it was whatever. I think it was really until maybe 2013, I really started getting more involved with gear and kit, and more firearms. I upgraded to Colt and Knights and PWS, and got a bunch on my wall over here. But yeah, I just kind of upgraded, I guess you could say, just from one thing to the next, and that was about it for. I started training too, probably around 2014, 2016. I really started taking like training seriously, proficiency, night vision. I really kind of just jumped in the pool, and that was basically it with that. At least for my infatuation and love for firearms. Getting myself into the culture and the business sense definitely was a little different.
Yeah, so back to just before we move on to that subject, I find it interesting, and I find it's kind of surprising how much my perspective of the years of '08 to 13 or '08 to 15 or '08 to 16 even, so much happened during that time, and it's uh I was in the military for a chunk of that one, and so I didn't get my first AR-15 until I don't know, until like 2023 probably, or not 2023. Sorry, 2013. Yeah, right,
Right.
like 6 weeks ago. No, until like 2013, and I was like, and all of this happened. All of these things happened while I was kind of away from the gun culture and kind of in the bowels of the military, and so um even seeing that shift from getting a rifle to like training and figuring stuff out is
Right.
it's odd because I think it's like the more I hear about other people's experience in it and their time, the more it changes how I think about my own development. And so
Mm.
um
Yeah, I think I've told people before. I'm like, we all start somewhere. You don't come out of the womb with the SR-15. Like you develop it. Like I got my first pistol, it was a Walther, and then I got my first rifle, it was a Bushmaster, and then I got a shotgun, and then I hated the shotgun, and then I just upgraded from there. Then I got into Glock, and from there progressed Colt and ARs, and yeah, it's just interesting. You got to kind of have the foundation and the building blocks, weapon manipulation, and then it evolves. And I think we're all kind of not guilty, but we all fall into that. We all started somewhere.
yeah, and that might be a pretty big distinction between the old and the new ways, or the older ways, and
Mm,
I don't mean it as respectfully. I mean the older ways were a little bit more quick to look at the thing and make evaluations of the person, whereas
right.
our newer time is trying to the newer ways seem to be a little bit more focused on what are you aiming at and how are you trying to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Hmm. So then you said there's a pretty big distinction between getting in, because I don't. Here's the thing that bothers me is I really don't. I've never asked the question and heard anyone say something like, "Oh, I just like guns." It's the gun. The idea of the gun always points to something else. It's always
Mm,
it's always in direction to something like a value of like self-sufficiency, or
yeah. Yeah.
so usually somewhat practical, right? Usually in some sort of utility or practicality. Sometimes that
Hmm.
practicality points towards a virtue like self-sufficiency, or self-sustainability, or self determination. But then on the other side, it's not that. How do I put it this way? the aesthetics of the thing also play a part. The role of what a thing looks like and how we look at it too really, I think it puts a dagger in the heart of the idea that everything that we're focused on is purely utilitarian. Which is why I think, in a very simplistic sense, if you were to approach gun culture as something as simple as like rote utilitarianism, I don't know how you would fit an illustrator and an artist into that field. Is that,
Right.
and I know this it's a bit of a simplistic approach, but it's been a point of, as a philosopher, I have to draw distinctions and make ideas and think about this kind of stuff. And so it's interesting because I really don't think gun culture is all about the pure utility of it. It refers to something else, probably best when points at something greater. And so how did you, I know that's a bit of a segue, but how did you get into then, like you said, your professional side as a creator, as an illustrator, as like, how does this, because you can't tell me how you did it in the sense of, well, I learned how to draw line art and then I learned how to paint. I imagine there's more to it.
Right. Um, yeah, and are you talking about as like how I, kind of came into the industry in a
Sure.
professional sense? Yeah, and I know you know this story a little bit, but I mean, first and foremost, like, yeah, I've always just been an artist, since forever, and then it transferred. The goal was always to make a living off of my art, no matter in what sense it was. And when I started the path of tattooing, at the time, I couldn't. I knew I wouldn't be able to just make a living off of selling paintings. Like I'm not that. I'm not that guy. Those days are kind of dead.
Unless you're Hunter Biden.
Yeah, yeah. Which, congratulations to him on all his success. It's just, so back to that. Like, I just knew it wasn't really going to happen that way. So I knew I had to find a medium, a lane, and just push. And I mean, I think, 2008, I was just I was completely covered. I had two sleeves, my hands, my neck, everything. I just went out the gate, getting tattooed and being surrounded, by other tattooers and everything else. I was like, well, maybe I could do this. And, so I started down that path, and it is definitely different. I entered the tattoo world at a time where there was kind of a changing of the guard. The shows were starting, like, Miami Ink and stuff like that. And so it was interesting that, there wasn't quite a rush on tattooing until I was a few years in, to where I saw, a lot of younger people kind of coming in and wanting to do this for different reasons than I was. But I gained success in tattooing, and then, for years and years, and then I opened my own studio in Salt Lake when I lived there. And then a little bit right before COVID, yeah, so about 2018, 2019, I was up to my ears and just getting firearms, and, the training was getting more. um I was just learning a lot. And so I was like, okay, like, maybe this is something like I could segue into. At the time, exclusivity was really hot, and, kind of, being plugged into like drop culture and, fashion and stuff like that. I saw kind of a lane there, to where it's like, well, maybe my art can translate. And I kind of started transitioning my artwork into the firearms kind of stuff. And, it was pretty wild how quickly it exploded. I don't think I was really, I don't know. I wasn't prepared, but I also I just never really gave much thought to what it would all lead to, I suppose. Obviously, I'm probably most known for my Memento Mori and Skeleton Reaper stuff, which is wild now to see. And now that I've been in the game so long, I don't know, it's weird to borderline say you're a trendsetter, but the stuff that I see now, I'm just like, wow, like I don't ever want to draw another Reaper, like with night vision or anything like that. It's I've been doing it for years. I'm kind of over it. I need something new. But going kind of circling back to breaking into the industry at the time, I was working for a suppressor company. I was still tattooing on the side. But when about the time COVID hit, I was working for a suppressor company, and I was having some pretty big success outside of that with kind of my brand, with illustration. I was illustrating for a few. I went from just kind of like designing some of my own stickers for friends and uh, like veterans and ODAs and stuff like that. And I started getting gigs with companies in the industry, t-shirt companies at first, and was having major success doing that, to where I was like, okay, I get this. Like I can do this confidently. So I was working for the suppressor company, and the goal for that was to get kind of a marketing position, being like, hey, like, obviously I work here. I know I love the company. I want to help. This stuff's really hot. I'm pretty successful at it. Um, I was actually working at that place. I wasn't even working there for the paycheck, because I was making triple what I would make in a paycheck in a day compared to what I was doing there. But I was there for the love of it, and that's probably a big thing with me is I'm loyal and I'm passionate about what I am involved with, and so I just kept trying and trying to get involved and help. They were kind of at a rough time in their company. So I was like, hey, look, like, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. Meeting after meeting after meeting and getting strung along for months. I finally had enough. And it's really weird. I think in the firearms industry, we are kind of taught not to be emotional, obviously, but I think it's, human nature to be emotional. I broke, and I stormed out, and I called my wife, and I was in the car, and I was just bawling, and I couldn't even get like a word out. I was so emotional. I tried so hard. I didn't understand why, they wouldn't let me help them. They wouldn't, man, it was that was a wild turning point kind of in my life, and unbeknownst to me and my career. Um, but yeah, I left, and I left, I drove out of the parking lot, and I basically said, I'm going to make it to where no matter where you look in this industry, you're going to see my work and regret ever, letting me go, not listening to me, etc. And and then right after that, about a week later, I was in Travis Haley's office with Jim Fuller, and we were working on designs and stuff. And then Agency Arms hired me for a gig. And then after that, Sig Sauer got a hold of me and made a little mini documentary, flew a film crew out and did a 3-day shoot. And it was just wild how that happened. Like, it just, like, me breaking also kind of broke something in the ether that allowed everything to just kind of unfold. And yeah, and then that was it, man. Like, I was going, and everything else was just, another a rung in the ladder. After that, I mean, obviously probably my greatest accomplishment up until now is working with OpsCore. And as you saw at SHOT Show, I did a lot of work for them for their Fast 15 anniversary stuff, and just kind of having that moment of going from, like, I don't know how to say it, like going from the crowd to on stage. Like, it's just a wild feeling. I've been to SHOT Show a few times, and I mean, to me, it's like Mecca. I love it for everything that it is. I love it for the futtery. I love it for the friendship. I love it for the business. But I've always been really, really proud of that. And the year before last, I did stuff for Blackwater, and seeing my art on the Blackwater booth was like a real moment where it's like, oh, I've arrived, kind of. And then this year it was just like, oh yeah, like I guess I could say I'm a serious player now. Like, I don't know. It's weird. Like, the way I was raised, it was to never really talk highly of yourself or, be boastful. And in a way, I'm still not boastful, but I'm very proud of what I've accomplished, and, I know we talked a little yesterday about just kind of like, man, if it all ended right now, like, I'm good. Like, I've kind of checked all the boxes I could ever hope for. But, yeah, in a long-winded sense, that's pretty much how I got into the industry. I was working for a company in the industry, and I was just like, you know what, I'm going to show you, and that was that.
Yeah. So culturally speaking, there's you brought up something earlier about like again, I guess I feel silly going back to the term gun culture at this point in time, but I'm gonna stick to talking about the firearms industry and the world going on. You said at one point in time, this idea in kind of in the 2019 era, this idea of exclusivity was trending or hot. It was, as you described,
Hmm.
hot, right? And I think of it. I've been thinking about it this way. In I think it's Jack Donovan who talks about in his book Becoming a Barbarian. He tries to draw this picture, and I think he does so rather successfully, where he's drawing this picture of kind of this empire in ruins, and he's referring to it as the empire of nothing. He's off, and in many, and that's he's accusing the contemporary world of being the empire of nothing. This is like America or the West right now, and of course the book was written a while
Hmm.
ago, and all of my life as I'm reading this book, I've heard this idea of like the West is crumbling, the empire is falling apart, Rome is collapsing, all this kind of stuff.
Hmm.
And then in his writing, he makes, when in retrospect and also in the book, it becomes very clear that his point in saying that this empire has become the empire of nothing isn't to say that it's all going to hell. It's rather to say that that means it's fertile ground for something new. Um,
Yes. Yes.
when it comes to frustrations of stagnation within the gun culture,
Hmm.
right? The gun
Hmm.
industry, whether it's there's no new innovation, there's no new, whatever you want to call it. There's no new innovation, or it's very like old money kind of stodginess. What I've been reminded of lately, and part of what your era of when I'm saying your era of gun culture, I'm saying that there was a distinct time in my timeline where I stepped away
Hmm.
from gun culture, and I kind of came back into it right around this 2019 2020 time frame, where
Right.
um I knew who the silencer companies were. I knew who the suppressor peoples were. I knew who all the I had used a scar in Afghanistan. I had used
Yeah.
I knew what Daniel Defense was. I had known all these other things, and yet I had kind of stepped away from it. And so when I came back into it, it wasn't actually like a new innovative tool that brought me
Hmm.
back into gun culture. It was a kind of a new attitude, I think is probably the best way of saying it. And
Mm.
so when it comes to um, art, the closest form of art that I am is I'm a writer in that sense, and
Right.
I find a very similar thing to be happening, where when I'm writing something and it's not going well, uh, it means that the writing is becoming stagnant, which becomes a fertile ground for something new to come out of it. And
Yeah.
it's just frustrating, but
Hmm. Yeah. Or like when my buddy Ed Calderon says, stillness is death. I agree so much with that because that was one of the big problems I had where I was working was stagnation.
mhm.
Um, I can't stand it. I Whether it's art or writing or business or what have you, it's like you've got to keep going. You've got to just throw it at the wall and see what sticks. You can't just be like, oh well, or no, we're not interested in that.
Mm-hmm.
You got to move. And I told them, and I've told other companies as well, like, if you're not utilizing me, then like I'm gonna move on. Like I
Yes.
don't need to be here. And going back to what you were saying about, you know, kind of the changing of the guard in that time frame of, 2018, 2019. It's kind of weird that Hunter Thompson has this great quote about the drug culture, and where you can, I'm going to butcher it, but if you stand on Las Vegas at a certain time and look west, you'll see the mark where the wave crashed and rolled back. And I believe we kind of got to experience that to a degree, with the gun culture and the change around that time period, where people were changing it up, people were seeing what was working, that things of the past were no longer working, and that war was changing, that what have you. Like I really, really, really love that. Like, we kind of got to be a part of that and come up with that. And now it's kind of, I feel like now, and I'm not so plugged in so much to the culture as I was, 4 years ago, simply for mental health purposes. But I definitely think we're kind of at a point where in that time frame we were seeing what was working and we went with it. But then right now we're not quite stagnant, but we're kind of like, okay, maybe what's next? Like, okay, that worked out and that carried us for so long, but what are we going to do now? We've evolved, and now we're this new thing. What is this new thing going to lead us to?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that's kind of where we're at. And the exclusivity stuff, I feel like that's kind of going away, or maybe has gone away already, short lived. But yeah.
My hope is that it or my guess is that um this idea of exclusivity will have to redefine itself.
Mm.
Um, there's a classic. I mean, it comes up pretty often, and at this point in time in the current year of 2023, we might as well start talking about it as history, but it still it still rears its head of the divide between the citizens and the veterans and the citizens and the military, and this sort of,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
exclusivity of being in special operations, and this
Hmm.
uh, maybe private brotherhood kind of mentality.
Right.
I think that maybe it's I have a challenge with the idea of exclusivity, is that it will always exist, but it will also always be
Hmm.
challenged and asked whether or not it's legitimate. So it's weird that, like, it when you're when you're there's a phrase that gets passed around through Ranger Battalion all the time, and that's um every day you must prove that you're worthy of the team. Okay,
Right.
that sounds great.
Yeah.
That sounds like it's a really nice thing to say, of like, we take this seriously, but um then every day the thing itself must prove that it's worthy of being proven to, I guess, is the response. And organizations like Ranger Battalion struggle when they don't when it as a whole doesn't measure up to the level of investment required to be a participant, if that makes any
Mm.
sense. Where it's like, this is why you see people getting out pretty quickly of.
Yeah, yeah. And I know, I mean, God, I can't count how many friends I have that are, Green Berets or SEAL team, or even just regular guys, 160th guys, what have you. I mean, I've touched every corner of the armed forces somehow by doing my artwork. And yeah, I think kind of going to that point is just like, I don't know. It's kind of one of those adapt or die issues, or figuring it out.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, and the exclusivity thing is always interesting, because there's always, that walled garden of people. It definitely used to be that way, to like SHOT Show, like it used to be a very kind of controversial thing. Like if you were going, people who couldn't go or wanted to go would, you know, bitch or what have you. And
Hmm.
I don't know. There's always going to be a walled garden. What is that? What is that quote? It's a club and you're not in it.
Yep.
Like
Yep.
there, but like it's one of those kind of deals
Yep. It's a small
where it's
club
always
and
going to
you're
have
not in
that.
it. Yep.
Exactly. It's a small club and you're not in it. And I'm grateful that I at least got let in for a certain amount of time that I'm allowed. But yeah, going back to what you were saying about kind of the bro vet culture versus the civilian firearms culture. I feel like that's completely almost dissolved, at least on my end. I don't really I see the bickering here and there and this or that, but like I really think around that time period it kind of the guard changed and it moved away from that. And I mean I like I said I'm friends with a tons of special forces people and they've been the nicest to me.
Yeah.
They've been the absolute kindest. I've never I don't think I've ever, and I've met Tim Kennedy. I've never really met a veteran who's like, "Oh, you're a civilian, like fuck
Okay.
you,"
Yeah.
and it's like, I haven't really, yeah, like I haven't seen that. I know it exists, and I understand it to a degree, but at the same time, it's like I had this quote for a long time where it's the rising tide lifts all boats. It's like if we're all in this culture community together, then like why does it matter?
Yeah. Why does it matter that we have distinctions between peoples? I
Yeah,
mean,
like I get it. You're okay. You're Ranger Bat. You have your brethren. That's fine. I have friends who I consider brothers who I would gladly go to the death with. Uh, but yeah, that's
I don't I think it's interesting, this argument of camaraderie. Like, oh, I can always when I think
we want to preach it, but then it just completely dissolves whenever
it's
whenever we get into it.
well, yeah, I mean, and in humility, it's not as simple as like join the military, get a camaraderie. Here's your
Right.
military issued brethren. Like, no, it's not that simple. And even now I can look at my own life and say the amount of people that I knew in Ranger Battalion that I still know now and spend time with, it's pretty small.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
that's not my entire my small circle of sorts, right? And so
Right.
it's not like, you know, but oversimplifying it to this idea of like requiring a pedigree to be my friend is a weird way of saying it. And I don't think many people really do that. I think the issue is arbitrary distinctions. That's where the problem gets made of like, or probably most classically, and this is just the fault of the internet, and you can't really trump it. It's
Mm.
just with the internet, people are going to try to vie for status, and
100%. Yeah, and I've seen that. Man, like we'll get into it if you want, but yeah, the clout, the ego, the big thing for me, going from like how we were talking about like the brotherhood to bro vets, fucking ego, man. And sorry, I don't know if I can curse on here,
you can curse on
but
here because I do the same.
okay, perfect. Okay, perfect.
Shame on you, Ethan.
The ego, three lashings. But no, for the ego and the clout, I understand to a degree, but I think more to the why. Like, why? Like, what is the need for that? I'm a civilian. I'm an artist. I have nice things. But like, I'm not an egomaniac. I'm not a clout chaser. I don't post a picture of my PVS 31s being like, ooh, look at me. Like, and I feel like that is something probably the hard last year to 2 years I've seen emerge on social media. And it's just like, man, like, why? Like, I don't get it. Like, just be yourself. Like, you'll either be loved or hated for being you. but at least you're true to yourself. I would rather be nothing and have what I have than vie for attention or what have you. And maybe it's, I mean, you and I are around the same age too. Like maybe it is these younger kids coming in, and I don't know what they see that maybe we don't. But it's I don't get it, and it's absolutely crippling the community, the camaraderie, by having these cliques and kind of, I don't know. It's tough.
So let's get a little maybe not even philosophical. Let's draw some distinctions here, because there's a difference between like a clique and a club,
Mhm,
right? And so
mhm, mhm,
there's a difference, and sometimes the difference is I don't, whether I like it or not, whether I think it's justified, um, or how official it is. And so
mhm,
uh, I don't know. I'm not here to criticize. Oh, nope. As soon as I say that, I'm going to contradict myself. I do see an element of clout chasing, but I don't.
mhm.
Maybe let me put it this way: I feel it, but I don't see it. That's probably the best way to
Ah,
say it.
okay.
Like I can't always, if I bring up something like, let's take any platform that we use, and if I look at something, it's very rarely where I see that as this is just for clout chasing. Very
Right.
rarely. With one exception, is when the only perception I can have of an individual's identity is their that they've built their sort of presence off of targeting and attacking people. That
Right.
that comes across to me as kind of clout chasing, of you never actually produce anything.
Mhm,
You're simply there to be the cynic. I'm the critic, right? It's this,
mhm.
I'm here to hold people accountable, and that's where I see a little bit of
Mm,
clout chasing goes. Another example of it would be uh the way someone can say something, the way someone could say something like, um oh, I got invited to an exclusive party, but I don't think I'm gonna go. It just doesn't interest me. It's like, you know what I mean?
yeah,
It's sort of that attitude of
yeah.
like, but and some people say that, and they say that genuinely, but when you can taste the disingenuousness of it, then,
Yeah,
you know.
100%.
And on the one hand, it's always frustrating to see. It's sort of like, you look, kid, you could do so much better if you just kind of didn't say that.
Yeah,
But on the other
100%, yeah.
on the other side, people are trying to figure stuff out. So I hope.
And I get everyone's kind of on their own journey and at different spots in their journey, but, just seeing that, I've always I've always just been of the mind to where it's like, be original and be yourself and let it unfold as it should, you know? Like, and I mean, kind of going back to the me leaving the suppressor thing, and I feel like when that happened, everything unfolded kind of, I guess, as it should, or as it was destined, or what have you. But yeah, I think definitely between like, there's a lot of trolls, which I think when you were talking about more clout chasing, it seems more kind of trollish as opposed to clout. The clout thing that I see online is like, oh, you don't shoot in Noveski. Oh, you don't have GPMVGs. Oh, you don't have this. You don't have that. Like a holier than thou type, and it's just like, I don't know, like why, why should, like everyone has different stuff. Like why does someone who has X make them better than Y?
Sure. I This might then have to be a confession of, I see more of the inverse, but
Mm, okay.
I can understand it. I can understand I can understand this idea of someone being like, "Oh, you don't have this item that I have, then we're not in the same class."
Right.
Um, and maybe that's the position that I'm in, because of, I don't know, privilege, experience, background, whatever. but I tend to see a little bit more of the inverse of I'm just as good as thing. This attitude of like kind of resentment towards, and maybe actually just comes down to that's what I'm more sensitive to. I'm observing that more often. But I've also seen that on different levels. So there's this other attitude of like, okay, I was in Ranger Battalion. Ranger Battalion was at that time a tier 2 unit. They would regularly try to compare themselves to tier 1 units, saying we're just as good as them. And
Right.
and yet, as I can look back and grant some grace to the attitude, saying young people, lots of attention or lots of ego, drive and passion towards becoming something good, and then they're looking up to somebody, maybe it's this unit or that individual, and saying I can become just as good as that, can get clouded by acknowledgement of capabilities at their current level, or I'm sorry, it can cloud over acknowledgement. So this idea of being just as good at something and this sort of resentment towards the thing that you're not, is something that I've probably picked up more on in gun culture. And
I could, yeah. Now that does make sense. Now that your resentment drives that, yeah, it does make sense.
So like sometimes I think now this is just me being a veteran of, sometimes there's a certain element within our community or the gun culture that harbors resentment against military law enforcement, or let's just use military because blending military and law enforcement's a little sus, not to be too Gen Z, but there is this idea that on the one hand you have this idea of like somebody will say something like, oh, I was never military but I wanted to, but I had something that happened to me, and you would get almost this like
Yeah.
level of apology or a desire for acceptance, and it's like I don't need the story, I just I enjoy your participation.
Yeah. Are you a good dude or not? Can you perform or not?
Yep.
Like that should be the measure. The measure of a man is like, can you stand shoulder to shoulder and complete the same task? Um, and that's kind of what always drove me. Was I didn't join the military for whatever reasons, but I always had a fascination with history, specifically military history. Obviously, I've been alive for the entire GWAT. But I think when it came to the firearms, I wanted as close. I wanted to taste the military life without kind of, I guess, submitting to it. Um, I don't know. I'm trying to say it to where it doesn't sound bad. Like it's not like, oh, pussy, you didn't join. But it's like I don't know. I wanted the Mark 18s. I wanted the Scar 20s. I wanted to rock the 31s. Like I wanted to have friends that I could train with and do cool shit with, and I got that. Would I have loved to have gone over there and fought, for my dudes to the right and the left? Absolutely, but maybe that'll come in another time. But
The world is
yeah,
changing.
I think it is, and it's honestly pretty wild to watch it change. As we get older, we hit these we kind of hit these milestones in life. To where I'm currently at, I'm in my mid 30s, and everyone's having kids, and it's just like, oh man, like it's just a weird time kind of going through. But yeah, it's things are always changing, and especially in the gun culture, gun community, it's an ever evolving beast.
Perhaps we might find out years from now, or we might look back years from now and say that the shift in gun culture from the sort of civilian military divide to this sort of fertile uncertainty as to what it is and isn't anymore came about at just the right time, when our attitude towards nation states and government actors also takes a pretty distinct shift. There's this, I know you and I have talked about this before, but it's this idea of, I wanted to bring it up again because we never actually finished the conversation about how there's the term metaphysics gets thrown around quite a bit, and another kind of simpler format of it is this idea of a worldview, and that is how you see the world and how you construct it, both in very real and then abstract objects. And so, like, an abstract object would be a hierarchy or a leadership structure. It's a very real thing, but it's not a physical thing as much as it's an abstract object. And there, oftentimes, the world feels like it's a divide between active participants and passive people who approach it very passively. Like, they're not as I don't want to say influential isn't the right word, but it seems like that this sort of distinction can become a little, it's not problematic. It can become a little caustic and self-destructive too. But so one of the examples of it would be, how do I put it this way? Let's see. One of the examples of how it looks like would be something like, people make a joke of, like, you've got players and NPCs is one example. That one's getting a little old, but another one that I think comes out is that, like, even within the context of gun culture, this idea of there being like the small club that you're not in it is this there's this idea always baked into the cake that there are certain people who have undue amount of influence and say over what happens in the whole environment, and then most people are just kind of sitting along, and that doesn't seem to stick very well when you look at the world. It's a really easy way to it's a really weird way of thinking about, not weird way of thinking about, it's a worldview that seems to be frustrating to me, because it's like, it feels good to think about, but it's hard to put to ground.
Yeah.
So, but this idea of this worldview of, like, there are conscious actors, there are active participants, and there are sort of passive observers, is an odd one. Especially when it comes to something as simple as an open market, or as something as convoluted as war, insurgency, fifth generational warfare, psyops, this kind of stuff. And
yeah,
it's that part has been interesting to me. That, I think, unfortunately for me, that's been on top of mind for a while now. I'm thinking about how do I view the world within a framework, or do I just kind of build it out willy-nilly?
I'm definitely the build it out willy-nilly guy.
There you go.
I've always been someone who just lets it kind of just go, and we'll see where it goes. I don't. I try to make sense of things as they come, instead of trying to absorb all that is and then dissect it. It's like, all right, as it comes, I'll take it, I'll process it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not. I'm way too, like, analytical. It's just the way of it.
I know you are.
I'm like, I have to think about this, and then you're like, well, okay, maybe
you dwell on it for 2 days, and
2 days, dude.
Yeah.
Amateur hour. No.
See, that's why I'm a willy-nilly guy.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. I would never describe you as that way, but now that you have, I have to figure out how to use it. So yeah, I know this willy-nilly tattoo artist. He's really accomplished at what he does.
This willy-nilly guy.
How do you spell nilly? That's important, because I can do the willy, but no. Moving on. So moving on a little bit. So going, like, I want to. we're on a good strand here when we're talking about some of the I want to go back. I guess I kind of want to stick a little bit on Hunter S. Thompson. I haven't read
Mm,
Thompson,
mhm.
which yeah, maybe I'll get around to that this year. And
It's he was quite the person. Man, yeah, just the way he processed life and events and his thoughts and ideals on certain things, whether whether it's him writing about the Hell's Angels, or the campaign of '72, I believe it was, like, or Muhammad Ali, or what have you. Like, just his process of things is just, man, something I really really admired. I admired his bluntness. He just saw through the bullshit, um, and he was blunt about it. Uh, I picked up the other day a book of his selected works, and it's just a few of his quotes. And man, he just the way he saw things, the way he did it was something I really admire and liked, and also how he lived his life. I mean, I would say we would be kindred spirits as such. Maybe I think that's why he got along so well with Ralph Steadman. Hunter was an artist on writing, and Ralph was an artist on canvas, and the two of them together, they just they created madness. And I think that is honestly probably the definition of art, would be madness. You're creating something out of nothing, and if you wanted to even boil it down to kind of a god complex, it's easy to get lost in that. And I definitely think it's a fine line. I mean, I've had my bouts for sure, but yeah, go on.
when it comes to creation and bluntness, what about have you thought about the difference between being blunt to get to be to being blunt to being to the difference of using bluntness to be accurate versus using bluntness to be belligerent?
Mm,
So
hmm.
this kind of goes back to, we could use it in a common cultural criticism of, like, you're not holding anybody accountable, you're just being a troll. But I don't want to I want to use that as like a touch point but move off of it, and that being,
Hmm.
there's this idea of, in philosophy, especially epistemology, of cynicism or skepticism. And skepticism is a little bit more of a technical term. And uh admittedly, I have identified myself as a skeptic in the past, and then also seen what is referred to as skepticism turn out just to be infinite doubt, like a refusal to commit to any reality. And so when it comes to, so the distinction there between sort of this skepticism, as in, like, I'm skeptical about something, as in I have my doubts, needs to be held in contrast to seeing skepticism as not just a way of life, but a fundamental principle that goes
Hmm.
beyond its appropriate weight. So, um, oh, I'm just skeptical about what? Well, sometimes you being skeptical about things gets you killed, and that's just the end of it.
100%.
And so,
100%.
for that bluntness of Hunter S. Thompson, and then also in contrast, have you read Jack London? Called,
Not in a long
yeah,
time, no.
because when I think of how you're describing Hunter Thompson, I'm thinking about Jack London. And
Mm-hmm.
Jack London very much so writes early turn of the century at 1900s American literature on what we would call adventure, like not Tom
Right.
Sawyer, Huck Finn level, but like a little bit more visceral.
Yeah, and Hunter's very similar, I guess, but his adventure would be life.
Hmm.
Whether it was the changing of the drug culture in the '60s to the politics of the '70s, into the Nixon, into the war, and then at the end of his life, towards the GWAT and 9/11. Yeah, he just the way he describes the adventure of life, but in the bluntness to where it's not so much, and sometimes it's demeaning and in a sense, but it's 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 blunt so that you get it, you know?
Mhm.
Like it's like yeah, it's kind of hard to describe without having it in front of me. Um, but yeah.
Then how does that um this is not I hope this isn't too hard of a segue, but how is that translated into tattooing? Like I have tattoos. You've done a tattoo on me,
Mm-hmm.
right? This is,
Hmm.
it shouldn't be a secret at this point. And I we're of similar age. My introduction into tattoos and tattoo culture was a little bit I grew up in the church when you started seeing kind of these edgier pastor types
Hmm. Yeah.
getting
I've
tattoos,
seen those.
right?
Yeah.
And for better and for worse, there's always growing pains, but then also
Hmm.
then the major introduction was in the military where you kind of just did it. And
Hmm.
now,
Yeah.
now we've I like so I even when I look at tattoos, I've even seen some um this is this is an outsider looking in, but I've seen uh this almost rise of like ironic tattoos where people just get tattoos that are meaning
Mm,
like not abstract, but like literally meaningless,
100%.
and
Yeah, 100%.
so for you, coming in, and you said 2000 and you started tattooing in 2008.
2009. Yeah, about
2009.
that.
All right.
About then. Yeah, I did a year apprenticeship in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, coming in. So I started getting heavily tattooed in 2008, and man, like I just it was a rough crowd. It was a turning of the tides, kind of, and from when I was getting heavily tattooed to when I decided I wanted to be a tattooer. When I was getting tattooed, it was very rough crowd, like bikers, gang members, very, very. If you don't belong, don't be long types.
I've never actually heard that phrase
And
somehow.
no, yeah, it used to be painted in the shops. Um, yeah, so it was it was an interesting time. And then when I started getting into tattooing, so I mean, I guess for a pause there, I kind of grew up, born and raised in North Chicago, so obviously somewhat of a rough area. So I was really no stranger to that environment of what a tattoo shop also was. But now going from getting tattooed to becoming a tattooer, it was changing by the time I was starting to tattoo. There were some shows out, and it wasn't just bikers. It was soccer moms, and infinity symbols and Pinterest, and all that stuff was kind of starting to come about. And it was definitely interesting to go from you know if a dude wanted this, you could tell him to fuck off, to where it's like, oh yeah, we can accommodate and work with that. Like it was definitely a change. I worked at a couple shops. I actually got fired from one shop because one of the old school guys just hated that I was young and coming in. And he was just like, you don't belong here. And I'm like, okay. And then when he inevitably got let go, I came back and I ended up working for the shop for a couple years after that. But yeah, it's just, man, it's just interesting, kind of going back to all that. This feels like so long ago. Yeah, it just, fuck. It was a wild time. I mean, I've tattooed on tour buses. I've tattooed bands. I've tattooed special operations. I've tattooed bikers, gang members. The first face tattoo I ever did was Crip. He got two big things right on his cheeks, and it was interesting because I was probably like 3 or 4 years into my tattooing career at that point, and it was my first face tattoo. And he was a younger kid, and I was just like, man, like, what are you doing? And he was just like, oh, I'll be dead next week. Like, who cares? And I'm just like, it's just wild to be a part of that.
Yeah, the temptation of danger is not so simple.
It was always, yeah, and the temptation of danger was always there. I mean,
Mhm.
I've had run-ins, and then if you want to, if you're in a tattoo shop, there's a gun in the tattoo shop. Or at least there used to be.
Yeah,
I used to have this picture when I tattooed in Kenosha of we all put our guns on the table up front. There's AKs and shotguns and pistols and ARs and stuff, and it's just like it was a different time as opposed to now where you have these young kids just you know tattooing anyone who kind of walks in the door with whatever idea they have.
yeah, my earliest experiences of getting any sort of tattoo work done was in a very sterilized environment. It was very
Mm.
it was sort of themed after a hospital of sorts. It was very clean.
Hmm.
Now
And
I don't know how I was young, and it was what it was, but things have changed. Um,
yeah, yeah, no, I mean, if you look back at like the early tattooers and the 60s, 70s, they used to tattoo without gloves on, which is wild to think of. They would use the same needles, but they would sterilize them in ovens or dishwashers instead of disposable, single use, stuff that we have now. And even being in the game so long as I have, going from strict uh, coil, machines to now the pen cartridges that don't weigh a couple ounces, as opposed to like a pound of steel in your hand. It's interesting to see how far they've come, and to that degree, how your first experience was super sterile, as it should be. But having it was just a different time,
mhm.
to where like, man, like you kind of I imagine it exists still somewhere in some places, but like it was one of those things where it's like, man, you had to be there to have the energy of a tattoo shop,
Mhm.
like where it's just chaos, like organized chaos and art.
The this is part of the reason why when I was thinking of Operation 2, one of the reasons why I wanted to do it with you was because of how you talked about things like that. Now, given this isn't meant to be, um, this is what it is, and I think for some extent of it, I with the way that you would talk about the way that you talk about something like that, like working in the tattoo industry or the industry, whatever it is, this sort of chaos, and how we talk about some of things like Hunter S. Thompson or Maya and Jack London, and then it was interesting to me because it gives me this window. One of the things that I've thought about for a while is like getting out of the military. There's this expectation that veterans are supposed to become depressed and aimless for a while. And some of that expectation is implied, and some of it is just the transition period. And you just kind of got to get over it.
Mhm.
People have different phrases. They use different terminology. And some of it is you just have to eat that humble pie. No one cares who you used to be. There is
It's a great one.
Yep, there's those are some things that are said. Another one is corporate America doesn't know how to, deal with it. You've been working in this high stress environment where you have to deal with strong personalities, and now you're going to be working in corporate America where you have nothing but weak personalities, which turns out not to be true. There are certainly strong
Mhm.
personalities in corporate America. And so the challenge that I was running into, and when I think about it this way, is that like I joined the military because I wanted to go to war. That
Mhm.
was sort of the root answer, is like I just wanted to do it. I wanted to see what it looked like. I wanted to be there, and I also wanted to prove myself, which is why I
Yeah.
became resentful when I didn't see the rites of passage as all that great. Now, that's an individual, that's a personal problem. um but I wanted to do this operation project with you on Into Beast because of the way that we are talking about this idea of the chaos of the tattoo shop. and how that feeling a veteran has when he gets out of the military of the world having lost its flavor or its color is a feeling that I discovered was not unique to veterans, but
Yeah, 100%.
but common across elements of culture. And I think that I saw people pursue things that, to a simplified, oversimplified, kind of white papery, generic approach, would say that's not I don't understand it. It's stupid, like the tattoo world, or what Hunter Thompson refers to as, you refer to his reference to drug culture, or these things. It doesn't do it justice to identify why those things happen. And the question would be, why do people? What is it that goes into the decisions that people make in regards to chasing danger, thrill seeking, this seedy underground environment? And that's where I wanted to go. I wanted to go that way, and I wanted to talk about it in the sense of how we came to this project, and what it means going forward. Like, what's the message behind it, and to be frank about it, to be very open in the sense of your approach to talking about this tattoo culture, this tattoo industry of being, it's dangerous, right? People are pulling out their guns, and there's this, this is in, you say this is in North Chicago, maybe it's in Milwaukee at the time, it doesn't matter where it's at. That's sort of this attitude. It brings on an attitude of like seriousness, but levity at the same time. And it's not to say that you figured out the answer, but it is to say that I enjoy. I want to have this conversation about what that looks like, because I think you can chase for that feeling inside gun culture as well. I'm in the know. I have the intel. I'm part of the community. I'm an influencer. I'm a special operations guy. I'm a contractor.
I hate,
like what are we chasing?
And I really think it's just life. Like I've dwelt on this for quite some time, and I'm a nostalgic, stoic fucking dude, and I think about that often. I think it's just the paths we choose and that we were born into. Obviously, I don't know. I believe everybody's created equal, but I believe everyone has circumstances that do not necessarily make them equal. But it's their experience. I was born and raised in a really bad part of like Chicago, and I grew up in that environment. And it persisted into my youth, and into getting kicked out of school, and drug abuse and alcohol and all this other stuff, and it snowballed from there. And somehow miraculously, art kind of saved my life. And then finding that culture of whether it's tattooing or the gun culture, kind of pulls you out. But there's also people that are born, behind picket fences in nice neighborhoods with, not divorced parents. And that's their path, and they have their experiences. You went to the military, you wanted to go to war, you wanted to see what it was like, you wanted to test yourself, as opposed to me, where I'm like, hey man, like I'm comfortable. I just want to live and do whatever the fuck I want and make art. And that's it. At the end of the day, like that's it. Like anything else is house money. But I think the chaos of it all is just what paths we have. There's some people that go their whole lives without chaos. There's people that go their whole lives without ever getting in a fist fight.
There's a lot of them. I don't.
Yeah, a lot of them.
I don't mean to be. This isn't meant to be too. What do you call it? Derogatory. But like, okay. So, art and philosophy. There's one thing that I think art, because I'm not an art. I'm not in that sense an artist in the same way. But art and philosophy run aground. Not run aground. One thing is that the worst thing that you can accuse a philosopher of is one of the worst things is navel gazing, which is this sort of engaging in meaningless questions for the sake of meaningless questions. It's this never-ending it's a combination of analysis paralysis and sort of masturbatory intellectualism, pseudo-intellectualism. Whereas like art, I imagine that there's a criticism that can be made of art is well, you're calling it art, but there's nothing there, kind of thing.
True. Yeah. Like I think Jackson Pollock, like, all right, man, you spread a bunch of paint dots on a thing and called it art. Like, nah, not really. Salvador Dali, different art.
Mm-hmm.
Alfonso Mucca, art. But yeah, there's definitely those things where it's just not like, no, it's not the same. You can appreciate it for what it is, but it's not.
Yeah, there's I have I have a hardship with it in the sense of contemporary art is difficult. It's difficult for me to appreciate because so much of it seems to be in spite of itself. And I understand how that communicates an emotion, but I don't care for it. Like it's sort of like cutting your nose to spite your face. Like it doesn't actually produce anything. And I don't mean that in an industrial sense. I mean that as in, like it didn't take you skill to produce that. But then there's also the flip side of it is like the criticism that's leveled at a Picasso painting is that he could paint so much better, but he chose to make these simplistic designs, these very abstract designs.
Right.
Like that can make sense, but it requires a whole appreciation. So what I see in a lot of contemporary art is sort of like skipping the hard work and going straight to the abstract. And it's going straight to the abstract. Like you never produced anything beautiful, so your ugly thing is just all you've ever made. And that can become a little, even that criticism can become a little assertive. But I think this needs to be tied back to this. I grew up in a dangerous neighborhood. Yes, absolutely. I know I did not. I did not. I definitely did not grow up in a dangerous neighborhood. So there's this idea. Maybe there's an idea of trying to figure that out. There is the allure, there's the temptation of a dangerous life because at least it's interesting.
Exactly. Yeah, I would rather live an absolutely dangerous life than a mediocre picket fence, whatever. I always thought about that for a while and kind of came to terms with that last year with kind of like I came from a broken home, rough neighborhood, all this stuff. And last year I kind of went in search of my parents to find out the whys, and getting my answers shocked me. But at the same time, in that I was able to kind of get closure for that and move on. And there hasn't really been too much in my life where it's like I need closure. I don't know. I'm able to just take things and be like, all right, is what it is. Next. But with that one, I was like, I really need to know. And yeah, and getting to know that that fast paced, dangerous lifestyle, like I don't know, it is alluring, and I think until you're kind of on the other side of it, you never really realize it. Because I definitely think back on some instances of my life where I'm like, oh my God, like, how did I survive? How did I get through this? Or how did I not die? Or, things could have just gone completely sideways. And I'm sure, and that's true in war as well. But I don't know. I think once you kind of have the distance to sit back and reflect, or you can then understand it. I think if you try to figure it out in the moment, you could maybe make a hastily decision that's not correct.
Sometimes the understanding of it is not purely intellectual. It's not purely written out in a clearly defined statement.
Mm,
It doesn't necessarily mean that it's not understood. There's a difference
mm,
between understanding and being able to articulate a thing and comprehending it. Um, as simple as that may be, if you want to get into like the word tactics is used a lot today, but the example would be I can describe just because I can describe you and write out on a whiteboard what a react to contact maneuver looks like doesn't mean that I'm
mm,
capable of applying it at the right time, in the right frame, at the right pacing, in the right situation, with the right violence necessary to see the outcome produced. And that the simplicity of that statement expands to this kind of idea of adventure. And as a writer, it's difficult because you're trying to. There's a. I know I've said this before, but there's I think it was Douglas Murray who said it. And he said one of the challenges of being a writer is you stop experiencing life and you start seeing it as writing prompts.
mm,
And
mm,
and that, if I'm going to be a little self-aggrandizing, has been a challenge in the past of trying to chase after experiences that I can't easily write about. Um,
mm.
maybe a confession, and maybe that's a little it's not a humble statement, that's for sure. So I think of this in the sense of myth, a book that has had influence, but not as much as I think. Um, not more influence than credit it deserves would be Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces. He talks about this idea of the monomyth and how all of these myths point to certain things, and that was the influence and instrumentality it had on my life was this idea of looking at myth as not simply a nice story, but something that points
Right.
to something that is true but hard to articulate. Um, despite the fact that the author is an example of that chaotically dangerous kind of person gone wrong, uh, Roman McClay, whose real name was something McLeod, he tried to talk about the same thing, as in sometimes you need to describe a truth in a story, not describe the truth in a statement.
Mm,
And I think that can get abused quite frequently, in the same way that art can be abused quite frequently. Oh, it's art. Like, no, it's not. It's trash. And
yeah. Yeah.
this is coming from my position, and I would like to hear your thought on it. Um, and so, in kind of moving on to where this is not moving on, but into why these things make sense to me, it's um, this idea of into beasts or into beasts to me. What it has meant is this temptation, this very real, honest, compelling temptation to submit oneself to purely what you would call instinct, but it's not really instinct. It's sort of the whims of the moment for turning oneself, and so in effect, turning oneself away from being a rational being, so that you're not held, so that you can't hold yourself, your conscience can't hold you responsible for the consequences of your actions.
Right.
And that's probably a wordy way of saying it. And I think in my culture, the culture in the community that I grew up in a very, let's just call, safe Midwestern family, um somewhat sheltered, not entirely, but it was very easy for me to reduce that idea of temptation into things like alcohol, cigarettes, and the strip club. And then
Mm,
going into the military for a while was this period of just rebellion. I'm going to do all the things that I thought I was told that I couldn't do. And my rationality for that wasn't because I could do whatever I want now. It was because this thing that I thought that was going to be the military didn't turn out to be what I thought it was going to be. And so my act of rebellion was against the world for not giving me my sense
Right. Yeah.
of purpose. So
Yeah, we had that conversation at SHOT, I remember. Yeah, kind of the feeling of everything I ever wanted and getting duped. I guess you could say it's like the same thing, like, never meet your heroes, you'd be disappointed. Huh.
but after that
Yeah.
disappointment, the statement needs to have a second part. After that disappointment,
Yeah.
you might mature into understanding that they're human too, and return to some value of what they are or are not. Right? It's
Right. Yeah.
you can't always blame the hero for not being what you thought he was. I can't blame Ranger Battalion or the Army for not being what I wanted it to be. It's not.
Right.
I had unrealistic expectations, and that happens. The temptation of turning oneself into a monster isn't as simple as not wanting. It's not as simple as this sort of disregard. It's sort of it's one layer deeper of like running away from it. Um and so when it comes to art and culture and observation of the world and seeing dangerous experiences and seeing how things are, um which sounds very, very petty, I think it's difficult to put into words any better than the hedonism of the moment. The temptation of it will be much deeper than just simply uh a feeling, a good feeling. It might be something more. So when you saw people in this kind of darker, not maybe the more edgy corner of the tattoo culture, and then also as we've seen in gun culture, and for your statement about in some ways making it, I know it's a bit simplistic. How have you seen this in your own self or in the lives of others when they've sort of submitted themselves to becoming a monster and made excuses therefore?
Hmm.
Because I can think of it in a very simplistic military sense of sort of, well, not simplistic. I can think of it in one way of like selling your soul in a way and romanticizing that and forgetting that the devil's deal, the deal that the devil makes to the character in Faust is not is not is not without valid temptation. It's not just some sort of simple thing where you can look from the outside. It's also tempting with certainty.
Hmm.
You know when the world's going to end. You have your 7 years or whatever it is, right? This
Yeah.
it goes back to the story of the kid getting the face tattoos. I know I'm going to be dead within a week.
Yeah.
Um, and in a sense, I would say, you poor fool. Um, don't sell yourself that way. But maybe I'm just a.
But I mean, that comes from, again, life. People have the picket fence, people have, the broken home, and it's their own decision to let the beast consume them, in a sense. Like I've submitted to my lifestyle. I'm, in my mid 30s now, and it's like, this is who I am. I know who I am. I know the choices I've made. I know the paths that I've taken, and I know where certain things lead, and I know where certain consequences are. And it's like, yeah, I get that. And when your time's up, it's going to be like, all right, that's it. You know, you made your choices. Um, yeah, I don't think you can ever kind of look back, as much as I love to romanticize, you know, the golden days, which I think everybody does to some extent. Yeah, when you give in to, there's sort of a surreal freedom in letting go, I think, and I discovered this at a very very early age. I think I was in high school, of just letting go and letting, you know, the choices you make unfold as they will, and just flowing with it. You know, whether they're good or bad, whether they're, you know, cheating on your girlfriend, or, you know, stealing from somebody, or doing whatever. Like, you made the choice. There's no going back. I mean, I'm sure it's, you know, it's the same with taking a life. It's, you know, yep, something you got to live with, but, you know, that's it. You know, I made the choice. I became the beast. Um, and the things that kind of accompany that.
Yeah, I think when you let it control you, there's a temptation to that. There's a
To
temptation.
a degree, yeah. There's definitely those moments. Being caught up. So, like, referring to like the tattoo industry. Well, not just the tattoo. My experience in the tattoo world. Getting caught up in it. There's kind of a difference to where you're a participant or not. Trying to word it right, but it's different. It's just different. It's dangerous, but in it's chaotic. But in the chaos, if you accept it, there's a peace in it. Um, Something I've gone through, something I know a few of my other tattooers have gone through. When you kind of just accept it and make peace, it's like, yeah, I know, I've made my choice. Like, and but there's such a calmness. Like, I can only probably compare it to, like, when you're in a firefight, and, you know, bullets are zipping by, and you process, like, okay, I'm gonna die.
Or I could
Fuck it.
die. Yeah,
Yeah, it's like, okay, like, I'm most likely just gonna fucking die. But, and when you make peace with that and process that, you somehow fight harder. And it's kind of the same thing. You know, I made peace with the stuff I've done, or the tattoo world, and it's like, okay, cool, now I'm gonna, you know, process that, check, moving on. Like, and there's a serenity, there's a peace to making that decision and getting lost in the chaos. And I guess that kind of goes back to, you know, submitting yourself to the beast. You are sacrificing X, but in return you get Y.
yeah. It's interesting too, when it comes to the war fighting side, or the violent side, or the gun culture side, or these different ideas, and I can think of it in different ways. When when it comes to turning oneself into the monster, into a beast, and I mean this even in gun culture, it's a pretty easy, not pretty easy, it's an important distinction, is that you're sacrificing the rational part of you. You're sacrificing the ability to see cause and effect, because
Mm-hmm.
that cause and effect is something that informs you of your shame. Um,
And a lot of people don't want to acknowledge that.
yes, and what I see is, I see that as dangerous. I see, not dangerous in like the dangerous temptation. I mean, you lose your ability to be effective because
Mm-hmm.
you're consumed by it, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
We see this in different forms of literature for sure. Whether you know, and this is kind of where you draw into this idea of like the werewolf, or the monster of some sense, is that when you succumb to it, you lose the ability. And this is the straightforward answer in gun culture, or even in America right now, being consumed by the zeitgeist of political upheaval or civil war or violence. This ever-loving temptation of violence. I think of it is that the people that I've known who are the most capable of violence have figured out how to. They haven't. Some of them have, and some of them haven't. But they've figured out. They've been able to walk up and cultivate that monster within them, but never become, no longer, or not become slave to it. And the temptation, I think, in many people's is to give into it and become slave to the monster. And the Jekyll and Hyde problem, it would be. This is in the Jekyll and Hyde problem. It would be to no longer function as to sort of give up being Dr. Jekyll for the never-ending endorphin of the Monster Hyde, or in the sense of the in the sense of a werewolf, this idea of lycanthropy being it being that sort of coming to the acknowledgement that we must all submit to something. I'm going to choose to submit to my basest instincts, so as to sort of not to absolve myself of the responsibility, but to erase my conscience of that acknowledgement, as if it would go away. It would be effectively blinding myself and saying I don't see anything. And this kind of problem of I've had to write this out so many times to try to get to the point of if I can see that my actions have consequences, I can understand my responsibility to them. But what happens when I try to make myself incapable of doing something so that I get to claim that I'm not responsible for the outcome? This is a long-standing argument that I've had to make, and one of the answers of one of the points of Into Beasts, especially when it refers to Americana and gun culture, is this idea of stripping myself of rationality so that I can't hold myself responsible for my actions. And sometimes that looks very simplistic, but then I think oversimplifying it is does not do it service, does not do it justice. It turns me into the person who I was, not sheltered, but sort of looking at darkness, I guess, in that sense, not in such a simplistic way that I don't like appropriate myself towards it. I don't understand how to think about it. It's scary. I don't want to touch it. It's dangerous. I don't want to be near it. Let's go to war. Figure it out. Get a tattoo. Fight.
Yeah. No, and yeah, I can understand the consumption part of that. And like I said before, just and that's kind of where the thing was. Like I kind of let it consume me to a point, but mainly for the ride, like another Hunter's Thompson quote is "Buy the ticket, take the ride." And I embraced the chaos, the danger, what have you, and just have ridden it to so many levels and so much time, and then it's transitioned into different tickets and different rides, and then all of that just culminates into life. But going back to what you were saying about that, it's the comparison. I can't remember exactly what it was you were saying, but it's a comparison as to like having a drink and being an alcoholic. You can have a drink every now and then, but if you give in to the temptation, you can become an alcoholic and completely ruin everything. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You were talking about it a little bit earlier on there's something about it was a short window of talking about being involved in the tattoo industry, and like some people are in it, they can see it, and some people aren't.
Yeah.
Like some people are able to, some people it's not that they're consumed by it. That's not the right word. It was just, there was a small window, and hopefully I'll get it back, but I don't want to like lose too much of that.
Oh
So
yeah.
so as we kind of move forward, is there, you know, this project on Into Beasts is a little bit, you know, like I found it frustratingly personal in a sense of like I had to, it wasn't as easy. Well, it's not going to be easy, but it was something that haunted me for a while. And we ended up introducing the concept of the Wendigo into the design, and like I want to say more about it, but the thing that stands out in the sense of the creature is that this goes back to the story of myth. And if I just think of it as sort of a cute fairy tale that gets turned into like a Disney movie that misses the point entirely, um, I,
Mm-hmm.
I find it kind of distasteful. Now, the other part of it being, um, my wife has Native American heritage, but the the interesting thing I saw in the story, the idea behind this creature is that they sort of gave themselves into greed, but not in that greed of like I want more money, but like I just want.
Mm-hmm.
It's not this simplistic greed thing. It's this sort of greed and survival combination, and as a result, it's sort of forced to haunt the woods, forever emaciated but still engorging in the flesh. And so like the thing that sort of greed, giving into, turning into a monster does, and this is probably where I would say Into Beast makes the most sense to me in the end, is that sort of the thing about submitting to the monster is that whether or not you expect it, you will lose the flavor of the thing that you were chasing. So, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like alcoholism, you lose you lose taste. One of the things that you lose is the thing that brought you there to beginning. Um,
Yeah, 100%.
you know, it's losing a respect for the thing, losing a respect for war, and understanding the place of violence. That violence itself is an amoral concept, but it has its place and its time. And if you lose respect for it, it loses its taste. It loses its
Mm-hmm.
position. It becomes unmoored from reality. The cost of becoming a monster is that you give up your soul. In that sense,
Mm-hmm.
you lose,
Yeah, and
the relevance of it gets lost.
yeah, I heavily relate to that in terms of, you know, being an artist is, especially being a professional artist, that's all I fucking do is I draw.
Hmm.
I make a living off of drawing, which is about as white privilege as it gets. But
How impressive.
yeah, and I go through I experienced that a lot in the later, so I've been tattooing what 13, 14 years now. I would say past the 10-year mark, you really start to kind of feel that way when you get burnt out and you go, when it's kind of, you were saying that about like art, when does, you know, when does, when you do art for so long, when do you get more caught up kind of in the money than you do the initial feeling of the artwork? You know, artwork starts to, you know, when you look at a Monet painting or something like that, or a Bernini sculpture, you're lost in it. It invokes a feeling in you. That's what art's supposed to do, whether it's, you know, anger, rage, love, sadness. Um, when does that lose its luster because you are just becoming a machine? You're becoming a beast. You're just churning out art after art after art after art. And I found that in tattooing later, and I kind of had to take a step back. And then I'm finding that more so now with illustrating, is to where I'm like, am I just illustrating for a paycheck? as opposed to like, am I illustrating for the love of it, for the feeling it invokes, like doing the work for Blackwater, doing the work for Ops Core. Like I see that, I can physically see it. And, I'm like, man, I'm proud of that. That invokes feeling for me. So yeah, that's an interesting thing when I don't know, being an artist, being a writer is probably very similar. I dabble in writing, but I've never really taken it anywhere. I know my lane, and that's artwork. And yeah, when is it kind of enough when you're sacrificing everything for it? Um, if you're even able to get out, and I've struggled with that heavily, probably the last 6 months of just kind of disappearing. I moved. I'm in the middle of nowhere now. Like, and also winter. Oh, winter's a bitch. But I've definitely been giving that a lot of thought. Of so like, why are you doing this now? You know, you you wanted to make a living off your art. You achieved that. You got there. You won. Here's the trophy. What now? Like, do you continue to be this machine that gets fed money and produces X? Um, and yeah, it's something I'm kind of figuring out, and I'm at an interesting point in my life where I don't know the answer yet.
'Cause
I don't know if what's that.
that was going to be the next question.
Hmm.
I've been waiting patiently.
I know we talked about this a little bit yesterday too,
Well,
but yeah,
I've been
I
waiting patiently
don't
for
know.
longer than since yesterday to kind of see what's happening. Like
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm in this transitionary period where I'm still tattooing. I've got conventions. It's always surreal for me too because I've kind of taken a break from tattooing, and now I'll be in Fort Bragg in May, or no, in April. I'm tattooing next weekend. But it's definitely interesting to be like, what am I gonna do? Like, I enjoy making art. It's been a little bit since I have this problem where I do so much for everyone else. I don't ever really save anything up for myself. And I'm like that in a lot of senses, not just pertaining to art. I just push everything out, and I don't, I focus on myself last. And yeah, I'm at this weird junction to where it's like, what do I want to do? I've been thinking about stepping back, kind of from the gun industry, and having my select few clients that I've worked with, but keeping it at that. Continuing to tattoo or not, I've put in all these years, and I've gotten everything. I've got a house, I've got land, I've got guns, night vision, all the material bullshit, um, the notoriety. I've gotten everything. So like, what do I do? What's next? And yeah, I don't know. I'm curious to see where the year will take me to kind of give me that answer.
as a child growing up in the church, there's this sort of story that you would hear every once in a while. And when I say it was a story, there are certain stories that people tell that, despite the fact that they're telling their story, you've already heard it before. You've already heard the same story told the same way by somebody else who is relating their own story to you. An example of this would be, or no, sorry, sometimes this is an indicator of bullshit. Where, um, for example, uh, there was a time where I was in Ukraine. I went to Ukraine for a little while, and there's this story that I kept hearing over and over and over again from people. And it oftentimes went something like this. It was like, oh, I came over here to go do something good, and I was going to join the Ukrainian Foreign Legion. And when I got there, they took all of my gear and they didn't give me anything. They just gave me a broken FAL that the receiver cracked after 2 rounds, and I escaped I escaped not even with my boots, and I had to flee to the west to get out of it. It's so horrible. They're the way that they treat people. And I heard this exact same story like a dozen times. Same thing. I went over here. I bought my own ticket to go to Ukraine. This is like a week after the invasion. So this is kind of,
yeah, I remember.
kind of at the height of it. And so the problem is that I kept hearing this same story come from different people. And it's like, I don't think everyone has the exact same story. And it ended up becoming a data point of like, if someone is going to tell me this story, I'm going to become suspicious of them because I was there functioning with a camera. And there's similar examples that you hear it in kind of the military arena of like, oh, I was going to do this, but then this happened. And you're like, okay, I've heard this story before. I was going to be a ranger, but then I twisted my leg in airborne school. I was going to be a this, but then I did that. I was going to be in the army, but I couldn't I would have punched a drill sergeant. There's different levels of it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But there was a story that I heard very often. There's the same similar story that as a child I would hear. And that was, I had it all. I had the success, I had all the women, I had the job and the corner office, and I had it all, but it was never fulfilling enough.
Yeah.
And in sometimes the story was told honestly, and I will give it that regard. And sometimes the story was not. It was told as like it was a con man story. A con man story of ideology. And it was, I've had it all. I've been rich and successful. I've been famous. I've been, at the height of glory, and I found it all. When I reached the pinnacle, I found it to be nothing but dust. And instead I found this. And sometimes it was, I found Jesus, or I found, some other statement. So this is no surprise as being a Christian. Or it might come as a surprise. It might come as a surprise for being a Christian if I've heard this sort of story told many times of like, I've seen the heights of glory and everything that the world can give you, money, power, fame, wealth, women, whatever, and none of it mattered because I was still empty inside. And I have an issue. I guess I have a little bit of an issue with that story. Is that the story is not convincing to people who haven't been there.
That's true. Yeah, that's been a interesting thing because I remember a couple of years ago, me and my wife were talking, and she was like, "Did you ever, imagine you would be where you were, be married or what have you?" And I was literally like, growing up, it was like survive every day. If I woke up the next day and had enough food, what have you, I was good. Um, so now, like, I have climbed that mountain. I've become something out of nothing. Almost to the highest degree. And you know, there's that expression, "It's lonely at the top." Like, well, when you get to the top, like, what else is there? Like, the journey down.
I think your headphones. I think I don't know if you can hear me. I think your headphones cut out. I heard but we'll give it a minute. And I'm guessing we're getting close to the end here too, so we're gonna give me a second here. Add destination to post comments. What do you mean? No, I want it. The live viewer comments show up on StreamYard. Oh yeah. Let's see. Let's pause this for a second. Bum, bum, bum. I don't want that at all. Can you can't unmute their guest? Let's just send a text.
Can
I
you hear
got
me
you
now?
now.
Okay,
We'll do
perfect.
the elevator. We might get the elevator music, and that was just a brief interruption.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
guessing your headphone drop.
Yeah, they're slowly
It's at
dying.
that time anyway. Usually, I wish
For
I
sure.
wish I would say that all of these episodes are artificially
Right. I've got to invest in some longer lasting ones if I plan on doing these. But I guess hold on, let me see if I can.
because you sound fine. I get because
I sound
yeah, you're
okay.
good. You're solid. So,
All right. Well,
you said the last thing that you said was perhaps the next step is the journey down. I have a
yeah.
feeling I don't see that. I don't see that happening yet. I think there's
But I wouldn't say, but down because obviously you get to the top of the mountain unless you sprout wings, you're not going anywhere. So it's kind of like, all right, well then what's next? Well, now it's the trek down. I've got a lot of pictures of me at the tops of tall mountains, and the journey down off the top is just as interesting, as enjoyable as the journey up.
hmm.
Um, when you're climbing a mountain, the destination's the top. When you're climbing down a mountain, the destination's the bottom. And I don't think it always has to be connotated as a bad thing.
By no means.
So
I
what's
said by
that?
no means.
Yeah. So I think whatever comes next, I'm gonna embrace it and just see where it leads. But yeah, going back to what I said right before my headphones died. Yeah, I mean, the thing where you're like, I think it's bullshit unless you've gone through it and understand it. I think you do have to go through it all and understanding it. If you were abused as a child and you try to describe it to somebody, they're not really going to understand it or feel for it unless they've gone through it as well. Same thing. I mean, same thing with a veteran. Unless you're in a gunfight, you can't describe it really to somebody who wasn't there or doesn't get it. So yeah.
Yeah, well, there is. It is. I think we have the art piece up now, don't we? This is a clip of what you drew. There is an element of that that's true. I think when as a veteran, yes, I will say that there are certain things that are really difficult. Maybe it's not that they can't be described, it's that I'm not able to. When I was younger, I would listen to my grandfather's stories.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandfather was a prisoner of war in Korea for 3 years. And so, me listening to his stories doesn't mean that I understood them. But I would still listen, and I'm thankful that I did.
Yeah.
And there is I now maybe years later I understood why he was so adamant on trying to tell the stories, because he would always tell these stories, and it's like I think he's trying to understand how to talk about them. Um,
Mm.
but there is a certain element of I couldn't understand him until afterwards, and maybe that's just because I had to grow up a little bit. Maybe that's because I had to go experience some certain things. But I look forward to seeing what's next for you. Uh, do you have you I guess I can't say that. I can't ask that question. Would it be what would it be? What does it look like? I look forward to seeing what comes next from your position. I think that I'm very thankful to be where we're at in regards to gun culture as a whole. Uh, I,
Yeah, I think it's definitely. I think it's on the up. I think a lot of stuff's got to kind of get put aside. I think we really need to come together on a lot of things and look past the petty bullshit.
yeah, I agree. Um, I don't want that to do any of this stuff. Live viewer yeah, it doesn't matter. StreamYard's a pain in the ass. Shouldn't be trying to figure this stuff at this point in time. So
Oh, good.
no, it's my apologies now. I should have had that better prepared at the beginning. Well,
No, you're fine.
this being the case, it looks like we have more to talk about in the future. But do you before we
Yeah.
before we sign off for the day, is there anything you want to leave with in regards to either the Into Beasts project for season, or what's coming up in your world, just on your end?
I don't really have much going on my end. A couple of tattoo tours around the
Yep.
country. That's really about it. I'm ready for winter to be over. It's been a long 5 months,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
I don't miss
yeah.
I do miss it from time to time. Who knows?
Well, you need to come back so we can go snowmobiling.
Let's do it. Although I have a feeling like I
I
have a feeling like I won't make it up until next winter, so we'll have to pick a time i
Yeah.
in next winter where when it's ideal. Maybe we'll do something else.
No, yeah, absolutely. We'll do some overland
You
snowmobiling.
know what? I have never seen anybody do that yet, and I think that it has its place. It would be interesting.
I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it this year. Because I went out. Was it Tuesday? I went out all day. Um, yeah, it was incredible. And just going around, I was like, yeah, I gotta I gotta figure out to where it's like I'm crossing multiple counties, and I've got gas cans, and how do I turn this snowmobile into kind of like an overlanding vehicle to where I have things to make a fire, some shelter, gas for the snowmobile.
When I got into overlanding, I had this idea of what it would be, and it was this grand adventure kind of worldview. And in retrospect,
And then you got stuck in the desert.
and I got stuck in the desert. Yep. And so, but the weirdest thing about it is that there was the before, the during, and then the after.
Hmm.
And the before and the
Hmm.
after were great, and the during was miserable. And it's just how,
So that's how all things are, though, man. Same thing, like going back to climbing a mountain. Like before, you're stoked. You're up there, you're stoked. Getting up there, bitch.
yeah, well, it's what, how is it, how did, I'm going to ruin it if I say this. So I'll leave it be. I'll leave it be. All right. Well, Ethan, thanks for coming.
Cool,
Thanks for
man.
coming on the show. Thanks for talking about this kind of stuff. I've been able to have a couple conversations with you, but I think this one is one of the better ones. I really,
Yeah, and I've got to work on it. I am quite the introvert, so when it
I
comes
think
to
you,
talking or being put on the spot, I'm terrible.
you misunderstood me. As in, this was one of the conversations that I enjoyed very much so.
Yeah.
Not that it's not an evaluation of your performance. I think this is me saying I enjoyed it because I think I got to see a little bit more into how you think about things, and it was
Yeah.
especially because this it, like in some way, and this isn't meant to be too end of it, but I find myself hungry for things that give me a feeling of adventure. Uh, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's as simple as got it is a feeling that I can taste, and I grew up
Yep.
in a culinary family. I can tell you when something tastes a certain way. Sometimes I can't describe it. Like, I can't
Yeah.
always describe you what a good banana. My mother was a baker, or is and,
Mm.
very proficient in the baking side of the culinary arts, and so, like, I can tell you what the flavor of her banana. I can't tell you what the flavor of her banana bread would taste like, but I know it when it's
Mm-hmm.
hers. And,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yep.
that sense of adventure and this idea that's kind of baked into, a certain part of gun culture, and why I wanted to have you on the show is like this sense of adventure, of being a part of something, being involved, moving, momentum, ambition, aggression. Um, I know it when I see it, and I know it when I'm faking it. And so,
Yeah. Yeah.
well, cool. Let's close off then. This has been the Redacted Culture Cast. Currently, at this time of publishing, this should be going live. Episode this would be episode 67 of the Redacted Culture Cast, slated to go live on Monday, the 27th of March, 2023. By the end of this week, season 1, Operation 2, the exclusive window to purchase the to get anything from that will be going live, and that'll be over at redactedllc.com. So we'll be doing a pre-order on the seasonal gear, the seasonal equipment, whatever you want to call it, the thing that market. Some of you have figured out the cipher already. Some of you may be looking for the next step, but by this time we're coming to the delivery of it. But for season 1 Into Beasts, I am thankful and I'm proud to have done this with you. So, Ethan, thank you very much.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for coming on, and I look forward to our next conversation. So carry on.
Yeah, we'll talk soon.